Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session. I'm Gabriel, Management Executive at First Digital, a First Technology company. We are really excited to host today's session and give you this overview of Microsoft Purview. With a mixture of on-premise and cloud storage available and being used by businesses these days, it's harder than ever to understand where your business data actually live, especially the sensitive data. We find that our business data is spread over a variety of clouds and potentially software as a service solutions. And the risk is threefold. It's a compliance issue, it's an issue about confidentiality, and it's an issue about security. So Microsoft Purview offers both the discovery and classification and governance of data in a single tool set. But before we start with that today, just a little bit of housekeeping. Today's session will be recorded and the recording will be made available on our YouTube channel, and details of this will be shared with you after the event. Please feel free to refer a colleague to it who might have missed today's session. Due to the size of the audience, and we've had real interest in this topic, everybody will be muted, and we ask that you post any questions in the Q&A section of your Teams client. You'll find that access to that Q&A window by clicking on the Q&A icon at the top right of your Teams window. Questions asked will be answered during the session by our hosts, or we'll allow 5 to 10 minutes at the end to go through any unanswered questions. In case we don't get to all your questions, we will reach out to you directly after the session in order to discuss those questions that you might have. And Gary and myself like to keep the session interactive, or as interactive as possible, with everybody on mute. So please use the emojis to express your emotion as we go through the webinar. Today's session will be hosted by Gary Finberg. He's our Senior Technical Manager in our Digital Workplace Division. Microsoft is a long-standing partner of First Digital, and we are excited to demonstrate this technology to you today. Also, brief introduction, in the background is Stephanie Brainard. She's managing this webinar, so if you have any issues or would like to get hold of us afterwards, please make contact with her using the Teams chat function. First Digital builds out a variety of value-added services across various technology verticals for our clients. Our business is made up of 4 pillars: our innovation team, which does all of our custom software development, DevOps deployments and consulting, quality assurance practices, our IoT capability, and custom monitoring solutions that we build for customers. Our automation and integration team focuses on process automation and represents various third-party vendor technologies such as Nintex, K2, Microsoft BizTalk, and OutSystems. We also have a data and analytics capability where we focus exclusively on the microstack in terms of infrastructure services, SQL, and Azure BI deployments in the form of Power BI and Synapse. And then today, representing our digital workplace team, who builds out content management-based solutions, low-code development using Microsoft Power Platform. We also specialize in Microsoft Viva for employee engagement. We drive Teams adoptions. We focus on Microsoft Syntex for document processing, and most importantly, Microsoft Purview, which is what today's session is about. Before I hand over to Gary, I'd like to do a quick poll, and the question that we'd like to pose to the audience today, and you'll see that pop up in your Teams client, is: have you ever sat down and assessed in how many different systems, either internal or external to your organization, contains sensitive business information? Okay, so quite interestingly, overwhelmingly, the answers are focused on we know where our business data resides, our sensitive business data resides, and we are concerned about it, and rightfully so. And then quite worryingly, over 20% of you have responded that you've got absolutely no idea where your business data resides today. So in this session, Gary will explain the components of Microsoft Purview and give you a practical example of the technology in action. It's quite a bit to discuss, so without further delay, Gary, I'm handing over to you.
Thanks, Gabriel. One sec, guys. I'm just going to switch over to my screen. Gabriel, can you see my presentation?
Perfect. That's
Okay,
come
great.
up, Gary. Thank you.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for the intro, Gabriel. Hi, everyone. Thanks for making the time for today's webinar. To set the stage for the session, we're going to be looking at the current data landscape and the data governance challenges that you guys and organizations are dealing with on a daily basis. So we'll look at how we can help you develop a comprehensive and compliance data governance strategy, and ultimately how you can leverage Microsoft Purview to implement this new unified data governance framework. So while it's tempting to jump into the technology right away, there is planning that needs to go into developing your solution. So if we step back, unified data governance spans and touches many core aspects of your environment. There are people, processes, policies, and technology to consider. And then there's another layer. We also need to understand and articulate how we create, protect, store, use, maintain, archive, and eventually destroy our data. So from that entire data lifecycle of your digital assets, from creation all the way through to disposition at the end. So I'll speak to some of the planning we need to consider to get the initiative underway, and then we'll look at the MS Purview platform and its tool set. So this journey all starts with understanding the policies that you're looking to define that will drive the technology decisions, and then finally implement and leverage the technology to enable and support the broader initiative. The challenge today is managing the growing data landscape of on-prem, Azure, AWS, multiple clouds, and SaaS services. So this is a growing challenge. Many years back, our data estate literally was an on-prem SQL or Oracle database. Then we slowly expanded out to incorporate some Azure services, Blob storage. Then we realized we need multiple cloud vendors. So we might be dipping into some AWS, also multiple cloud environments, and many SaaS services. So as all of these services proliferate and we're engaging with them, this becomes, like a tsunami of data, and we have to get a handle on it, because not only do we have to deal with all these disparate data sources, but there are now multiple compliance requirements and standards and protocols that we need to conform to. So that's a huge challenge on data officers. So how do we start to understand and surface the data that we've got buried across all of these operational silos? So on the one hand, you've got business users who want to consume the data as and when they need it. That's all they're interested in. I need this data. I need access to it. On the other hand, you've got IT, you've got data and security management, whose job it is to make sure it's the right information, that it's trusted data, and that users are using it within the corporate guidelines and complying with industry regulations. So there are kind of two scenarios there. There's a growing requirement for business users to consume the data, whether they need access to, like sales data that's in a Power BI report. They need to consume data that's in Blob storage, in data lakes, in SQL, wherever it might be. So a couple of things, just before I kick off and we start talking about Purview, I just want to mention that this discussion is going to be divided into two sessions. So today is a high-level intro session, mainly targeted at technical business users and IT decision makers, although I'm going to go into a high-level demo of some of the capabilities. And the aim is just to give context and to this Purview platform and its component tools as they relate to your current data challenges and compliance requirements. And then we're going to run a subsequent technical deep dive session where we get right into the deeper aspects of Purview in a live environment. And lastly, just before I cut over, I think as you're going to see in the webinar, Purview is not a single tool. So it's a full-blown compliance, data management, and governance platform. So to that end, obviously within an hour or 45 minutes, we can only focus on something specific, and we're going to be looking at the data catalog, the Datamap, and Purview Studio. So you guys can get a feel for what this tool is, what it looks like, and how it works. And then in a subsequent session, we're going to cover the compliance side of things. So things like adaptive protection, which is a phenomenal capability in the compliance center, data classification and sensitivity, data lifecycle management, data loss prevention, insider risk management, audit, e-discovery, amongst others. So you can see just from the length of those topics, the compliance side is a massive session all on its own. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's get into Purview. So what I'll cover, if we look at the agenda, we'll just have a look at what unified data governance is. So it's, you know, and what it addresses. And then we'll look at Microsoft Purview. Then we'll also look at how Microsoft Purview addresses the unified data governance framework in the scenario. And then we'll drill into some of the tools. So we'll look at the kind of portal or the kind of landing experience called Purview Studio. We'll look at the data catalog. We'll look at the business glossary, and then we'll look at some of the insights. So just to give a little bit of a definition, and there are many of them floating around, but basically unified data governance encompasses the people, processes, and technology required to ensure consistent and proper handling of an organization's data assets to guarantee commonly understood, compliant, trusted, and secure data throughout the enterprise. So I know that's quite a mouthful, but it is trying to sort of create a definition for quite a broad concept. So a couple of things, and I'm sure you can all relate to some of the icons around that question mark there. You know, the data landscape is getting increasingly complex. You know, so if you just look around there, I'm sure you're going to identify various, like, you know, there's the Office tenant and the Office type of documents. There's web content. There's email. There are packaged applications. There's all kind of digital media assets. And then obviously on the data side, you know, all of the structured data assets. So the challenge now is, you know, we might be successful at managing them individually, but we're in a scenario now where we need to aggregate and create a kind of semantic layer on top of all of this data so that we can understand that data estate and surface the benefit, the combined benefit of all of that. And what we're also seeing, the trends in the industry, is that this hybrid multi-cloud scenario for multiple vendors is becoming the norm and is only going to increase. So the key is, before this becomes a runaway train that, you know, literally just falls over and is, you know, is unmanageable, to get out ahead. And that's where this unified data framework comes in. So from a data officer perspective, you know, historically, that first tier of kind of ops and management were really the core kind of like responsibility of the data officer. But new things have crept in. So it's discovery. It's like, what data do we have in the environment? Where did this data originate, and can I trust it? So that's also a core thing. You know, again, keeping track of the source, the origins, and the trust level of the data. And then from a compliance perspective, what's my exposure to risk? Is my usage compliant? How do I control access and use? And what's required by all these various regulations and compliance standards? A couple of things to consider just in scoping out this solution. So we need visibility across hybrid multi-cloud and geographically distributed data landscape. We need to understand what data attributes, data entities, and data relationships exist across this landscape. We need to classify the data so that we can know how to govern it, because, you know, you can't just dive into governance. You actually need to kind of classify and understand what you have. We need to define policies to specify how data should be governed for each type of governance classification. And we need enforcement of data quality, security, and lifecycle management policies across this landscape. And then we need to know things like what data is being collected, where is it stored, what is its business purpose, how many copies, what's the golden version or the single version of the truth, what's the quality of that data, and where is our sensitive data. So that's something that's critical to consider, and you know, becoming a bigger challenge. You know, if you've got these massive distributed data sources, how do you know where there is data that might have sensitive stuff? So maybe credit card information, or corporate secrets, how do you surface that across this landscape? So this slide is just to sum up what I've been saying so far, just in terms of bringing together all these challenges, in this data landscape, and pulling this into a framework so that we can understand what the parameters are and start to tackle it. So from a kind of top level, we've got people, processes, policies, and technology, and we're going to look specifically at how Purview addresses these. And then, as I mentioned, we've got to consider our data and the data lifecycle. So what governs all of these aspects, the creation of that data, the protection of the data, storage of the data, the use, maintenance, archiving, and destruction of that data. And then we also have these sort of vector points, which are, we've got our edge, the edge perimeter to kind of factor into the scenario. From a security perspective, we've got our data centers to factor in. This might be on-prem or cloud-based. And then we've got multiple cloud-based scenarios. So it's an overwhelming challenge, but leveraging this framework, we're able to start to quantify things, and then leverage the tooling in Purview, we're able to start implementing the solution. So onto Purview now. Just from a little bit of a historical perspective, Purview was initially sort of had its start in Azure. And then on the green side here, you've got this unified data governance piece, which is what we're going to look at today, is around the kind of data landscape. And then on the orange side here, you've got risk and compliance. So we'll have a quick look at the Microsoft 365 Compliance Center, where you can see all the compliance-related tooling. And obviously, that's going to be covered in a separate webinar, because it's a whole nother discussion. So we're going to be focusing in on this unified data governance today. And I think with this whole unified kind of trend or direction, Microsoft are looking to kind of consolidate all of these components into this overarching compliance center in Microsoft 365. So again, I'm not going to go into detail on all of these elements. We're focusing on the top left here, this Datamap and data catalog, which is really powerful new technology. And then we'll just for your awareness, these are all the other areas, as I mentioned earlier, of this kind of overall Purview 360-degree view. So we're going to go look at this Datamap and data catalog. But as I said, in a subsequent session, we'll talk about all these aspects like data lifecycle management, data loss prevention, information protection, etc. And something very interesting around all of this stuff, which I'll speak to, is this new technology of adaptive protection. So getting into Purview, Purview Studio is made up of a couple of key components. So we have at the core of the experience is the data map. And, I'll show you in practice, what that looks like. But the idea here is that we're creating a semantic model. We're not storing the data inside Purview. Effectively, it's a meta model, it's a semantic model, and all built around metadata. There's a data catalog. The data catalog allows us to go out and discover these various environments. So if we need to go out and discover aspects of Azure, if we need to discover like blob storage, if it's SQL servers, if it's AWS, and a whole host of other things which we'll look at, that's where we leverage the data catalog to kind of register these as data sources and then go and scan them and kind of pull those schemas and definitions in. And then on a data kind of officer side is the ability to view insights, so to understand what's happening in that data landscape. Just a couple of high-level points around the tooling. So it's giving you capabilities to manage and govern operational, transactional, and analytical data. It's purpose-built service to address discovery and compliance needs. It's a fully managed serverless PaaS service, and it eliminates manual, ad hoc, and homegrown solutions. So this is an important point, that just looking at the industry reporting out there, and is showing the sort of huge range of custom tools and disparate tools that companies have previously been buying in to address all these different facets that you saw on that previous slide. So now we've got this kind of, the goal is for this integrated single set of capabilities that all speak to each other. The idea is to automate the discovery of data in on-prem, multi-cloud and SaaS sources, classify data at scale. So here's a key thing, is that, if you start thinking about the volume and disparate nature of all of this data and these data sources, it's one thing to set your focus on this type of initiative, but the potential for having to manually kind of tag and classify content is an overwhelming and frightening concept. So you'll see how a lot of the tools inside Purview do kind of data extraction, data classification, and they surface all of this information for you as part of these classifiers and extraction capability. And another core capability here is something called data lineage. So, a lot of times we think about our data in isolation. So we've got a table, we've got a report, got various bits of data around the estate. And whilst the data scientists or data engineers might have a better insight into this, business users have no clue. They need to understand things on a more semantic level. So if I'm a business user and I'm looking for sales data to include in a report, where am I going to find that data? I'm probably going to be chasing a whole bunch of engineers. They're going to put me in touch with other people. And then it becomes quite a technical experience. So that's the idea here, is to kind of surface this data up, and then also to be able to see the data in its context. So for example, if you're doing a kind of a scan of let's say a SQL database, and it's got stored procedures in, and it's got various like pipeline activities and automation, you're able to unpack all of that into a visual experience inside Purview, so that you can actually see all those transformations, that these were the source tables, this is what the output of that stored procedure. So it creates this whole different experience around understanding everything that goes into a data solution and into that final output. And then also what it does is it allows you to search for data, find that data, and then literally reach out to the custodian or steward of that data in line inside that experience, and ask for that data either to be shared with you or for access to that data, obviously all in a fully controlled manner, with kind of an approval process. So it brings the business user much closer to that data owner. And then I mentioned there are insights. So we'll have a look at that, but that's basically like a rolled up kind of reporting view of all of the statistics and trends around what's happening with your data. So lastly, just before we go into the demo, just want to touch on just this high level kind of, not really an architecture, but a view of the bird's eye view of this scenario. So, we've got our kind of multiple, where on-prem, cloud, SaaS, whatever it might be, kind of locations where our data is stored, kind of being ingested into the environment. And then also the different types of data sources that we can scan and ingest. And then we've got this basic view of what Purview is, or at least the Purview studio and aspect, which is kind of a couple of components. So it's all based around the Datamap. So that's where everything starts. It's the kind of huge model of all of your data. And then it gets surfaced and various experiences for use for data producers and consumers on this side to be able to kind of find this data and interact with it. There are new capabilities around data sharing. So you no longer need to like copy tables if you're sharing them with a dev partner or with a colleague or with a client that you're developing for. You're able to do this tenant to tenant secure sharing directly out of Purview. I've mentioned the data estate insights, and then our data policies, which is kind of in preview at the moment, but some powerful new policy-related stuff. Okay, so let's just get into a bit of a demo. I'm just going to end this slideshow. And just give a shout if you can see a screen that says First Digital Purview.
Yes, Gary, can see that. Okay,
great. So guys, what we're looking at here, you can see up here, this is no longer Azure Purview, this is Microsoft Purview. It's evolved. And ironically, just while I was prepping for this webinar, I see Microsoft, the try the new portal. So they've already upgraded this interface, but in the interest of stability and everything, this is the common interface. This has just been released in the last, week or two. So basically what we're looking at here is the sort of landing experience for Microsoft Purview. And what you can see on this landing page is we've got a couple of statistics up here. So it's telling me in this environment, I've indexed or I've scanned 4 data sources. I've got 344 plus assets, and I don't have any glossary terms. So that's not really important for what we're doing today. And then I've got a search option, meaning I can search this entire data catalog. And I've got various options here. I can browse assets, I can manage the glossary, or I can go to the knowledge center. So just a quick touch, I'm just going to quickly click across to the knowledge center. So Microsoft have a really well-defined set of information here to get you guys started. There's a whole bunch of videos, really, really comprehensive, all MVP-based stuff, very useful. There are all the Purview blogs, and there are a whole bunch of tutorials. So very useful to come across here when you get started. Then you can see a couple of other things. There's some options for links, which you can customize, and then here's some recently accessed data. So just before we actually go in and look at some data, I just want to talk about a couple of these experiences here. So we start off in our data catalog, and you can see I've got a couple of options here. So I'm on the landing page. I can click to browse this data. So I can browse the data by collection. It's going to load in a sec. And I'll speak to what collections are in a moment, or by source type. So immediately you can see the useful, how useful this is. Like I can come in and see, what am I looking for? If I'm just browsing for data, am I looking within Azure subscriptions, Blob storage, data lake, SQL databases, SQL servers, or Azure storage? And obviously this can expand as you increase your data. We've also got this concept of business assets, which is in preview, and I'll explain what that is conceptually. And then we've also got this concept of a business glossary, which I'll also explain as we go on. Then on the left, we've also got our data. We've got our data map, and this is kind of the heart of things. So this is where we're going to go to register and scan our data sources, and I'll speak through. Just given the time we've got, I'll speak through as much as I can of that. We've got our data insights, which is effectively reporting on what goes on. So for example, who owns the data? What does the catalog adoption look like? What do our assets look like that we've got in the environment? And then there are a whole lot of other things around curation and governance, so glossary, classifications, and sensitivity labels. Data policy is brand new, so we'll demo that in the deep dive. And then there's the management tab. So this is where you're kind of going to be setting up connections to external data sources, where you define all your credentials, and there are also workflows that you can develop around some of the capabilities, and other options here around lineage and data sharing. So I'm just going to go back to the catalog and just give you guys like a quick sort of overview of what this is. So ideally, this is like a shopping experience. You can come into the environment and literally search for data. So if we go back up to the top level, I could say, let's just say I just search on a wildcard. So you can see this is bringing back everything that I've indexed so far. So there's probably a few hundred assets in here. And if we scroll down, you can see these are SQL tables. These are all asset types. So some of these are SQL tables. As I scroll down, here's an Azure SQL database. Here's a Azure storage account. There's the actual SQL servers themselves. So there are many different types of assets. You control the scope of what you're scanning via these rules that I'll show you. There's scan rules. And then you can obviously just drill in, so say we decide we want to drill into this. Well, first of all, let's have a look. We've got all of these filters on the left. So I can go in, these are like dynamic refiners. So I can go in and I can filter by, like I only want to see dashboards. I only want to see data pipelines, etc., files, folders, reports, or stored procs, whatever it might be. So you can see these are all the types of assets that you can inventory. It's deep. And then you can also, you've got all of these filters, so I can filter by data source type. And obviously this is dynamically generated on what I've scanned. You can view, you can filter by collections. So say I've got these different collections. I've got the first digital root collection, and then I've got a US Azure SQL and a US Azure Blob. And you can see what, assets live in there. And then there are various things like you can search by contact, so say Lawrence is a custodian of one of the applications. I can see all of the data that Lawrence owns, or if someone's designated as an expert on content, that designation gets associated with that piece of content. So I could search for an expert on data pipelines, kind of thing, and it'll bring back all of the data around, all of the data options and assets around that. So you can see, I can go and see what, like a rating on data. I think I've got an example here. So here you can see this data has been tagged and it's been rated a certain way. So you can also start to show the quality of data, to kind of flag that up for users. So I'm just going to step back a bit and move also just to show that I could do the same thing. I could view by collections. So say I'm going to speak about collections right now, but say in this scenario, our collections sort of designate a kind of our global presence, hypothetically, and we've got data assets in Asia in this use case, and we've got data assets in the US, for example. And then within that space, I might have data factory assets in Asia. I might have SQL assets in the US. I've got ADF, Amazon, Blob, SQL, SAP, whatever it might be. Now I can see over here which I've got assets in, and I can drill into that. I could also just go and view by different types. So I can say, okay, I'm interested in blob storage, and then I can go and kind of open up that and then drill inside and actually see what's there. And we'll have a look at this step of actually drilling into a piece of data. Come to move over to the data map. So basically, the data map is where everything happens. So you can see these tiles indicate my collections. Now, the concept of collections is it's like a kind of a logical folder structure or container structure that you can define, and it's up to you. So the use case I've set up here is we've got these regional locations, and then we've got various kind of data assets in those locations, whether you can see the US kind of can be collapsed up to the US kind of or expanded. Now, these are not only just raw containers, they're also security boundaries. So you can define roles, you can allocate roles for containers. So I can set, say for the US, I might have a different data custodian to Asia. Then what you can do is that can flow down. So there's an inheritance model, or you can break inheritance. So I can say, whoever I define as the custodian of this container doesn't flow down. Like there's a different custodian that manages the Amazon data assets and the data factory assets, etc. So you can see this becomes super useful. You could also use like a domain model. For example, it could be much more of a semantic thing where you have like your company and you have prod, like you have dev, UAT, and prod, for example. Or you could have by department, so if you've got ops, you've got HR, whatever that might be, and you can surface the data assets that relate to kind of products in that model. So this is a really, really flexible model. I'm drilling in just in the interest of time to probably the core capabilities. So as you can see, say within this purview, you can see this link off here. I've got like 4 resources that are registered and set up. So I've got some Azure resources, I've got some database resources, I've got some Blob resources, and I've got Power BI. Now, and you can see here over here in this sort of US Azure, I've got another Azure SQL database configured. Now, what I'm going to do is to add a data source, you basically click on register. Now, here are all the data sources that you, out of the box, you can access. So you can see this is super comprehensive. I mean, just this one alone is Azure. So I can register and scan an entire Azure tenant, and it will scan all the assets based on rules for all of the resource groups in that tenant. I mean, think how powerful that is, just from a pure indexing perspective, as opposed to trying to doing that manually. Or you can, for example, let's say we actually want to sort of take this approach. You can go in, you can select your management group, you can select a subscription. So let's say I take this subscription, and then you'll see all the available resource groups here. So I could say, what, I only want a single resource group, and then I could go and register that. But I could do that at the top level and literally leave that running and scan the entire environment. Then you can see we've got AWS, Synapse, various Amazon storage, Blob storage. You'll recognize some of the Azure stuff, Data Lake, and then it's sort of, I mean, you can see how comprehensive this is, going off into kind of a whole bunch of third party. There's Oracle, Salesforce, SAP, etc. So let's register a simple option. Let's register Blob storage. So I click on that. I go to my subscription and I choose, I'm going to just choose this storage account. So you see it lists all the storage accounts in that subscription. And I'm assigning it to a collection. I could allocate it to any one of these collections. I'm just going to add it to this one. And then I click register. Now, note that registering, you can see it's now added to the bottom here, Azure Blob. Registering in and of itself just lets Purview know that there's a data source has been registered, but it doesn't do anything with it yet. So in order to do something, we need to kick off a scan, right? So you can see I'm clicking that option, and it just gives it a default name. I can change this to say it's like a full index, and it's got a connection runtime. I've got a credential, and I'll speak to that in a moment. But when you basically set up your Purview tenant, you need to define a managed one or multiple managed service credentials or identities. And then I'm choosing, again, I'm saying in this root collection, I want to go off and test the connection. And it says the connection successful, and I click continue. And now it wants me to scope the scan. So it's going and looking at that data source, and it's bringing back a bunch of things. Now I could click, to choose to like include or exclude things from the scope. So I can kind of do that. I'm just going to leave it as everything. And I'll click continue. And now you'll see we have this thing called scan rule sets. So scan rule sets define what it's scanning. So, so if I click on this Azure storage, if I view the detail, you'll see what's included in this rule set. So it's actually, because this is not a structured, it's not a database of tables, it's also looking for files. That's what's stored in Azure Blob storage. So it shows me, and I can scope this down. So I only want to scope it down to CSV and JSON, for example, whatever it might be, or PDF. I can do that. Then you can see these classification rules. So you've got like 209 rules. Now, obviously, we're not going to run all of these because some of them are regional and very specific. But for example, if I want, let's say we've got a South African rule here, South Africa ID number, right? What that's going to do is it's going to look in all of this data, and it's going to identify. So, and these rules are based on like regex or string. So if it sees a format of this string or pattern that it's looking for, it's going to flag that up, and I'm going to be able to go and look at the classification for that. So for this data source, it might flag up that I've got ID numbers, I've got bank account numbers. So now I know when I go and look at the definition for this particular storage data, I know it's a risk, and I need to take some like kind of compliance action because potentially I'm surfacing private information. But let's just leave that. So what I'll do is I'll just choose the system default for that. And note, you can also create custom rules for your set, just new scan rule set, and then customize it. And there are templates that you can base that on. And then you can set a scan trigger. So, if it's a volatile data source, you might want, regular scans to trigger. So what it's going to do is anything that's changed since the last scan will now be pulled into the data set in Purview. But, for our instance, let's just say it's once. And it gives you a little bit of review. And now I can say save and run. So now effectively what Purview is doing is it's going out using the managed credentials. Now note, it's not just random. You've got to define specific credentials for that data source inside Azure. So if you're indexing a resource group, you've got to have the right identities. Also to note, once you go into indexing data sources like SQL, you need to you got to go to the key vault. You got to create a new key vault. You got to create a secret, and you leverage that identity for that specific thing. So it's fully locked down, very, very secure. And we can see that this is running. So if I go to view details.
Gary, just a 15-minute time check while that runs.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Gabriel. So what I'll do is I'll just sort of show you what this looks like. So once this is kicked off, you can see nothing's been discovered yet. It's queued, so it probably sits in a queue for a minute or two before it kicks off. But you can see when it was registered, you can see the collection that it's been allocated to, and you can see the source hierarchy. So it's from our kind of puppy check, and it's in this certain resource group. I'll just give it a quick refresh to see if it has kicked off yet. Okay, so now you can see it's in progress. So I'm going to leave that again in the interest of time, and go back to so there you can see how you can infer from there, that it's the same process. If you're going to be if you register a SQL data source, the only difference is you need to prep all the supporting credentials. So again, create that key vault, create the secret, and then go and assign to the asset, whether it's an entire resource group, or whether it's a SQL server in there, or whether it's an individual database. Obviously, that all needs to be taken care of, and then this runs. A couple of things. Well, let's actually just, again, in the interest of time, let's just go into some data. So you can see what we've got. So if we go in and browse, and we say, let's say by source type, and here I've started to sort of index some of the subscriptions that I own. And we've got some SQL database. There's like a bunch of items in this environment that I can browse into. But let's say we go into this, and we go into one of these storage accounts. and then we unpack one of these containers. And let's say we want to look at this piece of data, or we want to curate this piece of data. So I can click on it and it opens. And now you'll see I'm in the context of this Excel file. And this could be a data table. We'll have a look at one of those in a sec. And here's where you can come and start curating this, because I can now go and define managed attributes. So where managed attributes are so powerful is I can go in and define, let's say a managed attribute is like the environment. So it's like dev, UAT, or testing or prod kind of thing. And I can go and create that managed attribute on the back end, and then I can associate it with a type. So I can say for all SQL servers, create that as a managed attribute, so that when I go in and edit that SQL server properties, I can go and choose from that list and associate that with as a dev database, or as a QA database or prod. And then you can see that metadata now allows me to do a bunch of stuff, because I can group, I can start viewing all my prod data or my dev data type of thing. And we obviously don't have time here, but we're also now able to set classifications based on, so if in this use case, this spreadsheet had sensitive data that was needed to be flagged up, that would appear here. It would say like South African credit card info, South African bank info. So now if I come and look at this content, I know this needs to be locked down, or there's a risk there. I can look at the properties. So if this was a database table, to actually give me the schema. I haven't set up lineage, but lineage would show the context that this appears in. I can see if there are any experts or owners around this, if they're defined, or I can go and define them. So if I want to say like Lawrence is the owner, which means if I needed to reach out to Lawrence because I want a copy of this, or I want access to this, I can contact him, and then I can just send this request access. He'll get that in Teams, he can answer, and I can get access in real time. And then there's this data share option. And then it also shows all the related kind of content to that piece of data. And note, I'm not going to do this now, but you can also open this in Power BI Desktop. So if you want to take this and report on this, or build out some capabilities in Power BI, you can directly from here. I just want to go back to home and just get some. So if we go look at, let's say we go look at a database table, let's just go and see. Or just randomly, I'll pick that one. So now you can see here it gives you a bit more of the hierarchy, so it's inside this SQL server, or it's located in the SQL server. This is the database name, the schema, and the actual table name. So this is the, kind of showing you this in context. And you can now see the properties of that. You can actually view the schema. So you literally can get to understand this data. Lineage is not on, but again, you can define owners and experts, and you can see all the related kind of tables to that particular thing. And then you can go in, now say we want to take this table and we want to curate it. So that's kind of what it's called. So I can now go in and say GOT table. Obviously, you can give it whatever information you want. I can associate a classification. I'm just going to pick that as a random. I'll pick a few as random examples. And I can grab things if our glossary is set up, and grab things. And now what I can do is, if I'm the custodian of this, I can define this as certified, which means it's fully tagged. It's grade A for consumption type of thing. And now you can see that managed attribute is surfaced on this. So I can either I can automatically assign, or I can now go and choose this. And these are all custom. So you can build a whole set of managed attributes and a whole glossary of that. So I can say that's dev, right? And I can save that. And now I've got this sort of extra bit of information around this. Like from an overview perspective, you can see I've got some classifications associated, and I've got this environmental information. And if we wanted to, we could obviously go in and manipulate this. But again, this is all heavily security controlled. I'm just admin, so I can see everything. And I could say I want to assign like Chris as an expert. Let's say Chris Ainsley. So I can give some info about him, and maybe the owner is, is Lawrence. So now you can see, we've got all of this information that we can now leverage to understand this data in context. So Gabriel, I'm not sure how much time is left, but effectively a couple of other things from a high level kind of management perspective is to look at this new concept of this metadata model that Microsoft are bringing into this data catalog space. And the idea here is to abstract off your actual assets into a meta model of, like, from a business perspective, so an application is inherited from, this is like a template that's set up, but an application is inherited from a system which has databases, right? Now these, you can pull in, this is the model, and you can pull in your assets into this. And you can obviously customize this. So you can create, you want to add pipelines, this is a specific use case for like some business process. But you can pull in anything you need, and you can map out this kind of like meta model of this whole kind of business scenario and attach all of your assets. So then what you get from that, from an end user perspective, people consuming data, they're able to get this really intuitive, abstracted view of everything, but understand how everything fits into that picture and be able to drill in, to what is this data domain? What is this application service? What are the databases that support it? What are the business processes that support it? So it's super powerful. And you can obviously define this. You can create your own assets. You can create your own relationships and kind of view all of this. And there's also like a tabular view, which is just another way to view that. So maybe in the interest of time, I know this was a very brief demo, but we had a very short time allocated. There is just kind of one thing I want to mention before we go to questions, is just around like another major sort of challenge that I know is facing most organizations, and especially in the data space, is companies are spending fortunes of money on data protection, yet theft or loss of data is still one of the greatest insider risks. So it's a challenge for organizations to detect and manage these insider risks in this exponentially growing mountain of alerts, because it's one thing to be alerted, but how do you make sense of all of that? So trying to find this balance between data protection and productivity. So if you think about it, it's like a juggling act, because if stricter data security policies might be effective across the board, but it might be too heavy-handed and could block like legitimate activities. But if your policies are too permissive, on the other hand, it might maintain productivity, but increase your risk of data loss. So this is something this is just a little bit of a teaser for a subsequent webinar, because what we really want to get into is this new capability called adaptive protection. So it's a capability inside the M365 compliance space that dynamically adjusts everything based on like user risk. And so it's all machine learning driven, and it's analysis of content and user activity. So it understands that balance between what people are trying to do and the sensitivity level of that content. So I won't go on there any further. It was just a little bit of a teaser. So yeah, thanks for taking the time, and let me hand back to Gabriel.
Thank you so much, Gary. We've got a couple of minutes left, so if there's any questions that you guys like to post to the Q&A window, please do so now. Gary, inevitably, we always seem to get a question around licensing. Now, some of you might have overheard myself and Gary's banter at the beginning of the webinar. Microsoft sometimes have the ability to, make a research paper out of licensing, and Purview is no exception. So if there are any questions around licensing, please reach out to us directly. It's a session on its own, and myself and Gary will happily talk you through any specific questions that you have around licensing. Right, just going to give a couple of minutes for any questions to potentially come in. I think then, in conclusion, thank you very much. We're about 2 minutes away from the hour. We will circulate this deck that Gary has presented to you guys afterwards, including the recording of the session. The last slide in our deck has got a few useful links that you guys might find useful. There is also a link there through to the research paper around the pricing plans for Microsoft Purview. So great. Gary, thank you very much for your time. Thank you everybody for attending today's session, and we hope you have a great Tuesday.
Cheers, everyone. Thanks.